I was going to rip his heart out. I'm the best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me. Lynx is a conqueror. No, I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody as ruthless. I'm Sonny Liston. I'm Jack Dempsey. There's no one like me. I'm from Nairclaw. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable. And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah.
Let's go!
You're listening to the Cage Nation TV Prize Fight Podcast. Coming to you from the Candid Cameron Studios in State College, Pennsylvania. Here's your host, Albert Cameron.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for my favorite podcast on all of the internet. It's the favorite because, well, I'm on it. I'm your host, Albert Cameron, and thank you very much for joining us for the Prizefight Podcast this week. Coming up on the Prizefight Podcast, George St. Pierre is apparently coming out of retirement, and he drew a pretty big name. Premier boxing champions drew some pretty dismal numbers recently, and we're going to talk to you about that. CM Punk, Phil Brooks, allegedly has released a date for when he is going to be fighting against Mickey Gall. We're going to talk about that. But before all of that, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room, of course, being the reports that the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championships, the sale happened, but the sale is allegedly complete. There is talks that a conglomerate, a group of investors, a combination of funds, a mutual fund, if you want to think about it like that, made a bid to the tune of $4.2 billion. And again, keep in mind, the UFC Zuffa LLC bought the Ultimate Fighting Championships from Semaphore Entertainment Group, SEG, for $2 million. That's an incredible return on investment, if I do say so myself. So allegedly, the deal has been signed. The UFC is being bought package and parcel. And Dana White is reportedly being given incentives to stay on as president, as figurehead, as someone to oversee the transition between Zuffa LLC, owned by Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta, Dana White, and Flash Entertainment out of Dubai and the United Arab Emirates. Now, this isn't new news. We've been talking about the UFC being up for sale for months now. If not, well, maybe not months, but weeks, certainly weeks. We've been talking that the UFC's for sale. We've been preparing ourselves. What happens, Albert, if the UFC gets sold? What happens if Zuffa sells? We've been ready for this. We've been ready. We've been talking. We've been preparing. We're ready. What is news is that Dana White is denying vehemently that a sale ever happened. He's sticking to his story that the UFC is never for sale, but if someone came with a $4.2 billion bid, they'd be willing to talk. But he's saying that the sale never happened, that the reports are false. Okay, you're the president of the company. You know more operationally about the UFC than probably anybody. But we need to consider a couple things. One, ESPN's reporting on this. ESPN knows exactly what kind of hot water you can get in if you report without having accurate sources and documentation. ESPN knows exactly what kind of trouble you can get in if you go around posting rumors, writing articles and news releases on rumors. You don't get to where ESPN has been or is going by doing that kind of stuff. That's amateurish. Even I know you don't post a news story because you heard it from your neighbor down the street that, hey, I heard Chris Liebman's going to be fighting a panda bear in China. You don't do it. It's unfounded. You don't do it. ESPN knows that. Same thing with Yahoo Sports. Yahoo Sports has some very high-powered journalists at their disposal to do the research, and to report the facts accurately. So Dana White's still saying it's not going to happen. In fact, he's saying that these false reports of the UFC being sold are the single largest disruption to business that Zuffa LLC has ever encountered. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you got to feel for the 400 plus people who work for Zuffa. Hearing that your jobs might be in jeopardy on the internet, that can't be an easy pill to swallow. I imagine a lot of sleep has been lost. If you want a hot stock tip, I'd recommend buying into the pharmaceutical company that produces Ambien, because apparently a lot of people are losing sleep. That must be a real difficult spot to be in. Uncertainty. Business, by nature, you keep things tight-lipped because it all comes down to financial warfare. For the UFC to remain on top, they need to be ever evolving. They need to be ahead of the game. They have to be where their competitors can't go or get there first. And of course, if you've read The Art of War, all warfare is based on what, children? It's based on deception. All warfare is based on deception. What's happening now is we've added the human element to it. If the UFC isn't being sold, if if the reports are false and if 400 people are sweating their jobs. Now we're beyond internet rumors. We are at a point now where our speculation is now affecting the human condition. Those 400 people have livelihoods to protect, and right now it's uncertain, and that must be a terrible spot for them to be in. They're worried, they can't be sleeping, they can't make plans, their future is cloudy. Where do you go in your head to find peace if you're hearing that the place you work for is being sold on the internet and everyone in the company is being tight-lipped? That is some Titanic mentality. When I say Titanic mentality, I mean, do you stay on the ship? Do you let the women and children get on the lifeboats first? Is the ship going down? Do you keep playing the violin until the ship sinks? Now, on the other side of that coin, if the UFC is sold, if the ink on the deal is dry, if Dana White is holding out hope for people that the company's in good shape, that it's not being sold, well, shame on him. The strength of the organization is going to be depending on trust. Can anyone trust Dana White if he's saying that the company's not being sold when it really is? Or, and here's another interesting thought, what if all 400 people who work for the UFC, they know, but they've been signed to confidentiality agreements? Again, all warfare being based on deception. Wouldn't it make sense to let your troops know, because one, you can keep their trust, you keep their loyalty, but you put a gag order on them. You don't talk to the press. You certainly don't talk to Ariel Helwani, because... Is it too soon for that joke? Is it too soon to crack on Ariel Helwani like that? Anyway, you get your soldiers, you inform them, you brief them. Keep your mouth shut. Don't talk to the press. Everyone has a lot to benefit if you keep your mouth shut, if you keep tight lips on this, okay? Maybe people are in the know. Dana White is an excellent businessman, and that needs to be said first and foremost. The guy is a fantastic personality. He's exactly what MMA needed. Zuffa Entertainment took MMA out of the dark ages and gave it wings to fly. That is undeniable. It cannot be disputed. I will argue it with you day in, day out. A lot of the MMA purists don't like Zuffa, and that's fine. That's your opinion. We can all share it. I firmly believe that there's a platform where that discussion can be facilitated. We don't have to be hateful. We don't have to go to forums. We don't have to insult each other's mothers. This can be talked about. It can be discussed. I personally am endeared to Zuffa. I love the UFC. I also love King of the Cage. When King of the Cage was being purchased by Gary Shaw Pro Elite, that could have been an issue. It happened. Thankfully, King of the Cage was able to get out. If the UFC is being sold and no one is telling their employees, shame on you. But I don't think it's going down like that. Dana White's a great businessman. So are the Fertittas. You don't take a business you bought for $2 million, turn it into a $4 billion industry, and not have business acumen. The Fertitta brothers, heirs to the station casino empire. Billions is not a rare occurrence to them. Will I ever see $1 billion in my bank account? Fingers crossed, but probably not. The Fertittas, that is not a rare occurrence to them, and they've earned it. Recently in the news, we've been talking about entitlement, of course, with that affluenza teen and a couple other things. The Fertittas are business people who have earned their millions. You cannot take that away from them. The millions they've got in their bank account have not been gifted to them. It is not a gift of entitlement. They have earned it. That does not undercut their character whatsoever. They are business people who took an opportunity and they ran with it. That is the American dream. That is capitalism at its finest. Now, a barometer that the UFC is actually being sold. Joe Rogan has famously said that if the UFC is being sold, he will be done. He will not call any more UFC events. His contract is coming up in August, I believe, and he said if the UFC is being sold, I'm out. Well, in the day and age of Facebook, I feel like I read this on an official source, but I think I read somewhere that Joe Rogan's done. He's not calling any more events. Barometer that the UFC might very well be done. One of the things that does interest me about all this is if the UFC has been sold, if it is by this investment group, what is the corporate structure? Based on the investment group and the way it was described, it sounds like the new owners will be a corporation. Right now, the UFC is owned by a limited liability company. It is owned by folks who have a predetermined amount of shares. The company is structured as such. If it is a corporation, it'll still be a share-owned system, but there will be a CEO, which I believe Lorenzo Fertitta is the CEO now. There will be a CEO. There will also be a board of directors that the CEO will answer to. If it is a corporation, there's also the outside chance that the UFC could become publicly traded. Doesn't mean anything right now, because it's all speculation. We don't know. We won't know until anything is officially announced. If a board of directors gets involved, well, then there's more cooks in the kitchen. If the company is publicly traded, well, then the kitchen's just on Wall Street, and there's going to be as many cooks as got the money to play. So that's going to be interesting to think about. Is that good or bad? Have we seen issues where private companies become public and then it just becomes an issue? Of course, it happens all the time. But again, we're keeping our fingers crossed that this is the best possible outcome. Georges St-Pierre, possibly the best welterweight champion of all time, is coming out of retirement, at least allegedly. He draws current UFC middleweight champion Michael the Count Bisping. Bisping's last fight was when he bested Luke Rockhold, of course, the famous fight that Ariel Helwani didn't get to see because he got the eject button pushed on him. Georges St-Pierre, a very, very, very big name back in the the early 2000s. His series with Matt the Terracera was classic, coming off of The Ultimate Fighter. I personally cheered and applauded the man when he kicked the crap out of Matt Hughes. Before I was Albert with Cage Nation TV, I was Albert sitting in his State College living room, realizing, man, Matt Hughes can really fight, but his personality really rubs me the wrong way. You're not going to get along with everybody. Everyone you meet is not going to be your best friend. There have been people, I know it's going to be hard to believe, but there are people who have met Albert Cameron that do not like him. I cannot change their opinion. Matt Hughes cannot change my opinion. So George St. Pierre beat Matt Hughes. It was a great day in the Albert household. St. Pierre's coming out of retirement to fight Michael Bisping in his super fight. Okay. I mean, is it going to be a middleweight catchweight bout? Is George St. Pierre ready to cut weight? As far as super fight bouts go, I think there would be more fitting super fights to have. I mean, the poor George St. Pierre, who's coming out of a long retirement, a long time on the shelf against a current middleweight champion who has knockout momentum going for him. The way I see it, and this is just gut feeling, the way I see it is that the bell's gonna ring, they're gonna come out, touch gloves. The count may very well run over St. Pierre. Maybe not. I mean, because do we consider Michael Bisping to be in the same caliber of fighter that George St. Pierre was being the operative? George St. Pierre, easily one of the best knockout artists, one of the best fighters in the modern era. Best fighters in the modern era. His stopping power was incredible. He was one of the most dominant welterweight champions of all time. Maybe not greatest of all time, maybe not, but as far as welterweight champions go in that lineage, George St. Pierre is certainly counted amongst the most dominant welterweight champions of all time. That fight's going to be interesting to see. I think Bisping has got a lot going for him in this fight. One, to beat Luke Rockhold. The middleweight lineage has changed a lot recently. Anderson Silva, touted as one of the greatest of all time. There's two camps that belong to greatest of all time. There's Fedor Emelianenko's camp, which I used to belong to. Fedor won his last fight, but it wasn't a great go. And then there's Anderson the Spider Silva as greatest of all time. His last couple fights, not the greatest honor to his legacy and lineage. So we had Anderson the Spider Silva, who was beat by Chris Weidman. Oh my god, it's shocking! Oh! Weidman didn't even hold the belt for one fight before Luke Rockhold took it away from him. Luke Rockhold did not hold the belt for one fight until Michael Bisping took it away from him. When you have championships changing hands like that, it means that the middleweight division is evolving. A new class of middleweights is coming up. When the Ultimate Fighter hit, light heavyweight was the division to watch. That's where all the hot action happened. After light heavyweight, it was welterweight with Matt Hughes, George St. Pierre. After welterweight, it was lightweight, Sean Sherrick, BJ Penn coming back. Now it's going to be looking like it's going to be the time of middleweights. The middleweight dichotomy is changing. Things could be heating up. It's going to be interesting to see how the super fight goes. One, I don't think Michael Bisping is the best super fight opponent for George St. Pierre. I'm also not the biggest fan of tune-up fights, but for someone who's been out as long as George St. Pierre has, a tune-up fight might not be a bad idea. Let's shake some of the cage rust off. Cage rust is an actual thing. You can rely a lot on muscle memory. If you get back into a strong training regimen, muscle memory, it's all coming back to you, like a Celine Dion song. It's all coming back to me now. Muscle memory will get you places, but it won't get you all the way there. So maybe a tune-up fight. We're going to follow this as it goes. Premier Boxing Champions draws dismal numbers on NBC. Why is this newsworthy, Albert? Well, one, thanks to Premier Boxing Champions, I've actually been getting a lot more into boxing. I remember when I was being a young kid, and boxing would be on after Monday Night Raw, and I was like, I'm not watching that. Boxing's so hard to follow. I have no idea what's going on. There's like 5 different belts out there, and they're just standing around hitting each other. There's no pageantry. One, that was extreme ignorance on my part. That was little Albert being an idiot and getting slapped in the head, being like, hey, listen up, chubby, get your shit together. Premier Boxing Champions has brought a new appreciation and a new level of appreciation for boxing that I'm certainly enjoying. NBC's a major network. NBC, ABC, Fox, CBS are one of those networks where they have good market saturation no matter what they do because they don't rely on cable subscription. There is an outside fringe of television viewers who may live in the Ozarks or in the Allegheny Mountains who get antenna, who still get ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. I could be on Gilligan's Island with an antenna made out of coconuts, and I still might have been able to see Premier Boxing Champions on Fox. Not Fox, NBC. I still could have seen Premier Boxing Champions on NBC. It's no big news story that a boxing event drew bad numbers. It can't be helped. Not everyone's going to be able to tune in and watch boxing all the time. I'm bringing this up because it's important that we do follow combat sports when we can. If we become complacent, if we're like, we can watch it anytime, I don't feel like watching it now, Extreme Championship nose pickings on, I'd rather watch that. That's when things get dangerous. That's when combat combat sports lose their foothold. And that's when things get scary. Premier Boxing Champions as a business model has a business model of, okay, we need to establish our brand, so we're going to hemorrhage a ton of money up front to get as much exposure as possible. If you see a blue boxing ring with a Corona logo in the middle of the ring, chances are it's Premier Boxing Champions. That's branding. They're making their fighters followable. Sammy Vasquez recently fought on a PBC card, and it was awesome because it was on Fox 8. Again, Gilligan, the skipper, the professor could have watched that card on the island if they had an antenna. That is great. That's combat sports need to evolve. When the Ultimate Fighter first hit, every network was clamoring for, oh, I got to get so much MMA, I got to get combat sports, I got to get it in, I got to get it. Real Pro Wrestling happened. So did the World Combat League. Two brands and promotions that completely fell flat on their face because they weren't ready for them. We live in a day and age where a jiu-jitsu school is just about on every corner, and it's awesome because jiu-jitsu is a fantastic art. We should be studying it. Same thing with judo. We also live in a day and age where the Eddie Bravo Invitational is on Fight Pass, drawing decent numbers. If Real Pro Wrestling came out these days, you better believe those jiu-jitsu students who knows that wrestling may help strengthen their jiu-jitsu game would have watched it. World Combat League. We live in a day where you can travel to Virginia and see Glory Rules fights. Kickboxing is no longer just exclusive to Thailand. It's no longer exclusive to the Netherlands. Kickboxing is a thing now. Like, we would have watched World Combat League if those two promotions would have had the insight to just wait a couple years. Wait for combat sports to settle, and we're going to get more comfortable with it. If we start turning our backs to boxing now, the same thing's going to happen. It's going to go away. Boxing goes away, well, then we got nothing to supplement MMA with. All the combat sports, wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, it is incredibly important that we support these because they are a part of the ecosystem, I guess would be the best possible word to use, ecosystem of combat sports. They're all incredibly important. That's why you don't kill snakes, even though they're gross and disgusting, because they eat the rats. You don't kill bats because they eat the insects, they eat the mosquitoes. You kill the bats, then the mosquitoes bite you. All these things are so incredibly important that they remain together. Closing out the Prizefight Podcast, CM Punk may or may not be fighting on UFC 203 against Mickey Gall. Personally, at this point, I think it's been so hyped up, so overinflated, that who really cares at this point? Reports out of Rufus Sports saying that CM Punk has had 16 practice fights, he's lost 15 of them. He has been signed to the UFC for years now and has yet to pull the trigger. Frankly, the luster is gone. The shine, the excitement is gone. We've waited too long. You put the car in the garage, the seals went bad. I don't think that car is going to start. I think would be the best analogy I can come up with for that. So, he might fight, he might not, he might get injured, he might be injury prone, we don't know. So that happened. Of course, we're going to keep an eye on it. We have UFC 200, 201, and 202 to get through, which I think have much more important fights, much more important implications than CM Punk maybe getting off his ass and fighting. That's my time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much again for joining us for the Prizefight Podcast. Make sure you check out CageNationTV.com where we're counting down the Friday 5. Speaking of Real Pro Wrestling, this week's Friday 5 is 5 MMA fighters who were involved in Real Pro Wrestling. You can always check that out every Friday at CageNationTV.com. I'm your host, Albert Cameron, and until next time, fights, Cameron, action. Thank you for tuning in to the Cage Nation Prizefight Podcast. All rights reserved, 2015-2016 Planetary Sports. The Prizefight Podcast is part of the Cage Nation Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.cagenationtv.com.